In Metaphor Refantazio, both wonderful greatness and missed opportunity are simultaneously abound. In the last act of this game, I found myself not exuberant and immersed in the thrilling conclusion of the story, but instead constantly distracted by a recurring thought in the back of my mind that I kept trying to push down throughout my playthrough. That thought being that I was disappointed in this amazing video game. While I loved this game and my time in it, I was dissatisfied upon finishing it. I took a few days to really sit with things and introspect and understand why this was the case. And I arrived at this conclusion. Persona 5 Royal ruined Metaphor Refantazio for me.
For real?
In this video, I'll explain why through examining each key facet of this game. In my estimation, these are the narrative, the characters, the gameplay, the music, and the little things. The narrative. I loved the story of this game, and I genuinely appreciated the way this game diligently worked to help you understand the senselessness of racism and discrimination. I felt it did well to convey this not just through major events, but through minor instances, such as when you go to the church for the first time and you are refused a service, the ability to purify your weapon simply because you are an Elda. I myself have been turned away from a store due to the color of my skin, so I can vouch that this, among many other examples, serves as realistic world building of a world wrought with discrimination. I need to note here one of my favorite decisions that they made with the narrative, and that is who you play as in this game. I think it's a wonderful subversion of the chosen one trope. You're the physical embodiment of the prince's ideals, but the entire world and you yourself think that you're nothing but a member of the lowest tribe on the totem pole. I love this because it makes everything that you achieve feel earned. You climb all the way to second in the public's hearts for king solely through your deeds, actions, and ideals. Not due to your title or station. In fact, it was in spite of your title and station. You form connections and deep friendships with members of each race who all devote themselves to your cause and journey because of their faith in who you are as a person. This makes it feel less cheap when you rejoin with your original body and regain your memories and everyone understands that you are the prince, as opposed to if you had known that from the start, because it conveys that you deserve to rule the kingdom not due to your bloodline, but due to your genuine ideals of a world without discrimination. Even though you technically are a chosen one, you earned everything, and actually, if it was a race, you actually started behind everybody else in the story because you're an Elda. To continue, I think this is genuinely one of the best fictional worlds I've ever experienced. The world they built is arguably the best part of the game. The different races are all beautifully designed, and I love the in-game explanation for the races coming into being. There are 9 different races without accounting for half-bloods, and the idea is that they all descend from humans like you and me. But the discovery of magic caused a worldwide conflict that eventually ended the world. So their world, which was much similar to ours, came to be known as the world before. The races in Metaphor Refantazio were either created artificially for the war effort instead conflict, or naturally came to be to survive the hellscape that was the world post-war. This evolution, which would have taken eons, instead took a few centuries due to the Magla accelerating things. I quite like the idea of human folly begetting the current fantastical state of the world. I think it's a boon that the world is rooted from a world similar to ours, as that bolsters the sense of immersion in spite of the fantasy setting. The power system in this game is also one of my favorites across all of the fictional worlds I've experienced. The link between Magla and anxiety, and the idea that facing your anxiety and accepting it and conquering it is what leads to the mastery and effective use of magic, is so good. Really an awesome metaphor for life, if I do say so myself. Roll credits. All that said, when thinking about the narrative, it definitely felt like the world itself was the main character. I'll explain my meaning, but essentially I feel like the balance struck in the narrative is slightly off. Let me try to explain why I think Metaphor had this challenge. For example, in Persona 5 Royal, the game is set in modern Japan. I mean, shit, it's in Tokyo. You play as a high school student, so in terms of your protagonist's experiences and the locales you experience in the day-to-day, you don't need to explain much at all. This means that the only exposition that the game needs to equip you with for you to be able to understand and follow along with the narrative is that of personas and palaces. Between Mona and the Velvet Room, this is basically achieved by the time the first palace is completed, which leaves more time in the narrative for characters and their relationships to be at the fore. With Metaphor, you're literally in a fantasy setting, so that means literally everything has to be explained to you, the player, so that you can follow along with the narrative. This means you're constantly inundated by lore dumps and context explainers, which naturally leaves less room in the narrative for a focus on the characters. This also means that the pacing in this game takes a pretty brutal hit. There are times when you're basically locked in for up to an hour of just sitting back and reading or watching cutscenes as the game sets you up for your next mission. Honestly, it sounds weird to say about a game that is essentially 80 hours, but I think many of the issues Metaphor Refantazio has could be fixed if it was simply a longer game. I'll touch on this again later in the video, but I feel like this is a good stopping off point to move to the next section and talk about the characters in this game. The characters. The characters in this game, I love them so much, but I think this game failed quite a few of them. I'll touch upon each character and explain, starting with Luis. I thought Luis was a wonderful villain, and honestly it was refreshing to have him be the main antagonist for the entire game. My favorite part about Luis is the fact that you are both two sides of the same coin. You both share the exact same formative event that sent your lives on an eventual collision course for the throne, that being the Elden Sanctum being raised by the Sanctus Church. Luis's friends, family, and everyone he knew died in this event, all because they simply existed as Elden people. This set Luis's mind into an irreparable determination that he would destroy this unfair world and replace it with one that is completely fair. And for you, the protagonist, this separated you from your father, the king's protection, and broke him, which eventually led to your right to the throne being abdicated since you're presumed dead. You see, in the most simple sense, you and Luis want the same thing, a world free of injustice based on discrimination. You are also both ardent readers of the late King's novel depicting Utopia and long to see a world similar to that. The key difference, though, is how much you are willing to sacrifice to achieve that world. Luis is willing to sacrifice every single person in the world who isn't strong, and you want to save everyone and show everyone a better way. I love when villains in a story aren't just straight up evil. Don't get me wrong. Luis is a bad dude who's raised a village or two in his time. Shout out to my homie Stroll. But I find that a story is much more enthralling when the antagonist is less, I hate you and everything you stand for and you're wrong, and more, we want the same thing, but I couldn't disagree more about your methods and the steps you want to take to achieve that goal. Now, Luis is actually a perfect example of the sentiment I described at the start of this video. While I think he's amazing, I couldn't help but feel disappointed at how he was handled. And this is Persona 5 Royal's fault. You see, while the game had multiple antagonists, something that the game did wonderfully was that it allowed you to form a relationship with two major antagonists in the game, Akechi and Dr. Maruki. You could choose to spend time with them during your days in between palace infiltrations, and the more you maxed out their confidant, the more you came to understand them and their motivations. This greatly enhanced the emotional impact of the inevitable conflicts that you had with those characters. You felt a lot more when Akechi revealed his true hand and betrayed you. You felt a lot more when you came into conflict with Dr. Maruki and had to infiltrate his palace, because from spending time with him, you knew he was genuinely a great human being who was just misguided in his efforts to help people. To not have Luis be a confidant in this game was a huge missed opportunity. Imagine if you could spend time with him on some of the days and build a legitimate relationship with him. Maybe you could have conversations about the fact that you both take inspiration from the Utopia book and in general debate ethics and what's right and wrong for the kingdom, and over time he could come to genuinely view you as an intellectual whose views he respects. Maybe by the end of his confidant he would confide in you that he's actually an Elda too, fully knowing that there's nothing you can actually do with that information, as nobody would believe you if you were to betray him, and basically conveying to you that your shared people are a motivator for him seeking to remake the world. This would be a humanizing moment for a character that doesn't have too many, because a big part of Luis is that he deliberately makes an effort to share a meaningful connection with nobody, but this also wouldn't stray too far from his character. It would be cool if the Elder reveal was locked behind maxing his confidant, and you straight up would never know or realize that unless you did. With Luis as a confidant, his motivations would be way more fleshed out, and it would make it more emotionally conflicting and impactful when he eventually asks you to join him. What if him asking you to join him was completely predicated on the fact if you maxed out his confidant or not? Or what if you had maxed it out, you had a chance to talk him off the ledge and have him stop his crusade and believe in your cause instead? Maybe not fully seeking atonement, but deciding to stop obstructing you. What makes this missed opportunity so frustrating is that Atlas literally already corrected the same exact mistake. A catchy and vanilla Persona 5 was simply an automatic confidant, meaning like Gallica in Metaphor and Mona in Persona 5, his ranks would be increased through story cutscenes. In Royal, they overhauled that and made him a regular manual confidant, meaning you had a choice to spend time with him, and if you did, then you could build a relationship with him and learn more about him behind his mask and see what makes him tick. In the same vein, the major antagonist of the Last Palace in Persona 5 Royal, Dr. Maruki, enters the game very early on and becomes your school counselor and confidant. So you spend the entire game with him, learning about what a genuinely good person he is, and you come to rely on each other and become legitimate friends. So I cannot believe how poorly Atlus handled Luis in this narrative when they already literally learned how to handle villains in the ideal way. Had I never played Persona 5 Royal, I'd probably just think to myself, full stop, wow, they really cooked with Luis. But having played Persona 5 Royal, I think they undercooked with how they handled this character. Obviously, I'm not advocating for you and Luis to become best friends. I'm only advocating that they dedicated a confidant tree to him and allowed you to spend free time with him and thus flesh him out even more as a character. Now let's talk about the other playable characters, starting with Stroll, Hulkenberg, and Heisme. Something I love about the handling of these three characters is that the narrative doesn't just put them completely in the background as new characters are introduced throughout the story. This was actually one of the failings of Persona 5. Ryuji and An aren't even my favorites, but as far as their presence and utility in the main story goes, as time goes on in the story, you definitely notice their lessening relevance and usefulness to the plot. Shout out to Ryuji's run at Shido's Palace though. I think Metaphor is clever to have your character meet Stroll and Hulkenberg first because they belong to the top two races in the world, the Clamar and the Rusan. Not only that, but Stroll is a noble and Hulkenberg is from an esteemed family, though she fled those circumstances to join the Prince's honor guard. So from the world's outside perspective, they add legitimacy to your endeavors, but also from an experiential point of view, their understanding of how the world works guides you constantly throughout the narrative. They are legitimately valuable advisors, and throughout the entire narrative, their wisdom is a saving grace for the party at various points in time. Stroll is always quick to address the masses and spin things in your favor, such as after the first fight with Luis where you kill him. Stroll understands political positioning, having had a noble's upbringing, and keeps the party cognizant of how your actions will be received as you apply for the throne. Hulkenberg spent years journeying the world in search of the prince, and aside from that, she was a royal knight who failed to protect the prince the night he was cursed. It's through her that you're able to get a gauntlet runner and master engineer in Nurus. Hulkenberg is a constant moral barometer for the party to lean on as well, which shows most during Yufa's archetype awakening. It's Hulkenberg who guides her to her destined path and connects with her in a way that nobody else could at that point in time. I think it's beautiful that the writers recognize the similarities between the two characters, both of them wholly consumed by duty, and allowed Hulkenberg, who was a bit more older and experienced than Yufa, and a bit more outside of that moment, to share that stage with her. Heisme is a character who hits close to home for me as I just recently became the father of a baby boy. Best thing ever. In fact, a lot of this game's story resonates for me as a parent. For example, while the knee-jerk reaction could be to label King Hippolytus V as weak and spineless for allowing the church to wrest so much power, I find the writing utterly believable because I could not imagine the transformative grief that would overtake someone who lost their beloved and their child. He did the best he could. With Heisme, he's not a perfect person and he's made mistakes, but what is so powerful about him is that he has learned from them. It's nice to watch him impart wisdom and insert thoughtful comments throughout the game's story, with his most powerful moment surely being his ability to communicate and relate to Joanna. Without Heisme, assuredly your journey likely would have ended in Mantira, as there would have been no way to reach Joanna, who you'd likely be forced to kill. So, Atlus did a good job improving how they handled the first companions you meet and kept them relevant and fresh all the way through the story's conclusion. Well done. That said, let's move on to the last three members of your party, Juna, Yufa, and Basilio. The handling of these characters, specifically Yufa and Basilio, is probably my biggest disappointment in any aspect of Metaphor Refantazio. And again, I don't know if I'd feel this strongly had I not played Persona 5 Royal. You see, the last three members of your squad in Metaphor fall victim to the Haru problem. So basically, the Haru problem is essentially that the lovable floofball that is Haru Okumura enters your party so late in the story of Persona 5 that you spend considerably less time with her than you do other members of the team. And so there's far less opportunity to attach with her and connect with her and come to view her as an equal member of the Phantom Thieves as the others. This issue is actually reflected in the popularity polls for Persona 5 as well. Haru routinely ranks last, even though she's a lovable character. Yufa and Basilio unfortunately receive the Haru treatment. They join your team when there's basically only the last act left of the game. There's only one real dungeon left after they join, or two, depending on how you feel about the Palace and Tyrant Star. This is why I said earlier that the game would really benefit from being longer. There are two steps that this game could take to amend the Haru problem. One step they could take is add more dungeons. There are 2 points in the game I feel that they could add them in, and narratively the game would be enhanced by it. They could insert a dungeon at the Mage Academy with the Rella boss fight instead being moved to the end of that dungeon. Narratively speaking, it would almost make more sense if she had you navigate a gauntlet through the ruins of the academy and popped up intermittently throughout the dungeon to question and test your resolve. This could also be an opportunity for more involvement from the Senate and for you to learn more about the machinations of Forden and the Sanctus Church in general, because let's face it, that part of the story is a bit undercooked. This could be a place or environment where the Senate could shine and have some character moments rather than just talk at a round table for the entire game. Maybe the big armored general comes and he's a mini-boss here as he tries to stop your advance towards Rella. By the end of the Mage Academy, after you defeat Rella, just as it is in the game now, she would be appeased and find an acceptance in entrusting the world to you. They could also insert a dungeon that you need to complete to reach the Elden Sanctum. They could concoct a story about how a human has come and corrupted the protective magic around the sanctum, and you have to navigate the forest to find and kill the human responsible so that you may gain entry into the sanctum. What I love about the opportunities here is that both of these dungeons would be completely different flavors to the ones present in the game. The Mage Academy would be snowy ruins of a place where magic was practiced at length, lots of creative opportunity there, and the Elden Sanctum dungeon could hit a Zelda Lost Woods vibe, so almost like a forest setting with magical anomalies. Having these dungeons would give you more time with Juna, Yufa, and Basilio, and in these dungeons you could give ample opportunities to these characters for them to shine and take center stage. The second step I think they could take to amend the Haru problem is to simply have these characters appear earlier in the story. They don't need to be companions necessarily, but just at different points let you cross their paths and see them. This would prove most difficult with Yufa's character, but it's still possible. They could have a mystery subplot where her voice can reach your mind all the way from Edria, and throughout the story there are different points where maybe you have conversations in your mind with her before you go to sleep and you both try to find meaning in your connection and try to understand why you're able to speak to each other in your minds and what implications that may have. Obviously, this could serve as an early hint that you're actually a physical representation of the prince's ideals formed by Magla. With Basilio, maybe you see him and Del from time to time taking care of business for Luis, and at a later point in the game after you've met Luis and joined his cause, maybe you even get quests from the two Magnus brothers where they delegate some of Luis's business and you need to go out and take care of things for them. You no doubt find resolutions to these tasks that would highlight you are true to your ideals, and this could plant the seeds of doubt even earlier in Basilio. So you see, it's frustrating to me as somebody who loved Persona 5 to see that they simply didn't learn from the very few flaws that the game had. Especially because Juna, Yufa, and Basilio are amazing characters. Juna is basically on with more depth and narrative utility. She's a famous songstress who people fall head over heels for, but she doesn't make that her whole personality, and on the contrary, her reasons for singing aren't for fame or adoration, but because she wants to give people hope and show them that there is light in the world. Her background is central to the plot, with her being an undercover agent who infiltrated Luis's inner circle and the cloak to your dagger when it comes to the mission to saving the prince. She's also an adoptive sister of Rella, another character central to the plot. Speaking of which, prior to Juna's adoption, she was a slave who sang to retain her sanity and hope for the future. I recount all of this just to kind of highlight how many layers there are to Juna. I really love it. Yufa is wifey.
And who's that? Oh, it's Mr. MVP, Sim!
Oh shit, I guess I should actually explain. Well, Yufa is genuine, caring, and down to earth. She's a priestess of her village, and also along with her brother, they are the two royals, so to speak, on the island. The role of priestess actually has nothing to do with her royal status. It actually belongs to whoever can see the flow of Magla best. You see, the third eye for the Mustari isn't purely for aesthetics. Through it, they can see the flow of Magla, and their talent for that varies widely. Yufa can see it extremely well. Sounds like she has it pretty good, right? Wrong. Her role as priestess means in her village's culture that should any disaster strike, she's meant to offer her own life to their dragon god. The islanders believe that this assuages their god's rage. In other words, she is a living sacrifice with no choice or agency other than to die. But it is in these circumstances that you can see why Yufa is so damn lovable. In spite of them, she not only accepts it, but she loves her people so much that she is willing to sacrifice herself with no reservations, because to her, it's a blessing to have the power to save others. This says everything about Yufa. She is love, compassion, and empathy personified. Might be boring to others, but to me it's inspiring. Basilio is really dope. He has some of the best voice acting I've heard in a video game ever.
Del, you remember they talked all that helping anyone in need? Something like that anyway. Seemed proper daft at first. Seemed naive to act like that kind of thinking could actually fix all the broken, cruel, unjust shite in the world.
That's because it can't.
Well, yeah, obviously, but what was it we actually wanted in the first place? Equality? Or justice? This lot's working towards a future, and God help me, I started seeing it. Maybe what they're fighting for is something better than what Lord...
That's enough, Baz. Joke or not, you'll get yourself killed.
But them lot even helped you out a few times, Del. That really impressed me, like. I don't know how to say it, but it was like a feeling I haven't felt since we started working for the Count.
I think Clean Scouse is one of the coolest accents in the world though, so I could be biased. What I like about Boss is that while he follows his brother's lead, he thinks for himself. As someone who is the baby brother of two older brothers, it really resonates with me watching him with Del, and towards the end of their time together, seeing how open and vulnerable he is about his growing doubts about Luis, having seen you and your companions work together up close. I always like to think that one of the marks of a true man is the capability to raise your hand and admit you were wrong, to take accountability. And Basilio does that fully, and his most intriguing moments for me are in the epilogue scene, how he's taken so many of Luis's ex-troops under his guidance and dragged them along to a better path forward. Really stand-up guy. So you can see based off of how I speak about these characters why, quite frankly, it pisses me off that Atlas didn't learn from the Haru problem. They each fully deserve what Stroll, Hulkenberg, and Heismay got from this narrative. Now, we'd be here all day if I went deeply into the other characters in this story, so I'll just do a small blurb on each. The second I met Grius, I thought to myself, bro is dead. Hard to feel much for him, but posthumously you lament his loss more as you get to know Maria and Fabienne. In other words, you feel more sorry that he died because you come to care about those who loved him. Speaking of Maria, she was a well-written child character. By that I mean they were able to make her and the things she said believable in terms of how a child would react to certain situations, but ultimately not a ton there for you to really connect to. But I feel this way personally with all the Atlas child characters that they do. Brigitte was just an amazing character. I love how raw and unforgiving she was about what type of person that the world forced her to be. She's not cruel, but she refuses to let the world take from her. I really love how she connected with you and allowed your irrepressible ideals to chip away at her cold heart over time. Katharina was a missed opportunity for me. Really cool conceptually in terms of her being a bounty hunting parapist and having a deep desire to make things better for her race in the world. I also thought that it didn't feel forced, that she was, in my estimation, one of the three characters to show romantic interest in the protagonist alongside Juna and Yufa. Brigitte, you'd have to tell me on that, but personally I don't see it. And it's honestly refreshing that not every woman in this game throws themselves at you a la the Riz God Joker.
Hey, are you going to be okay? My gentlemanly nature is making me worry about you.
Hey, what did you do? Outside the store? Is that... Whoa.
I saw the light on in here last night. Did you think you'd just try and trick this romantically impaired fool? I was worried about you, so I came to check on you yesterday. You could have just said you were busy, even if you had to lie about what you were doing.
So you already have a favorite? I came to say hello yesterday, but when I looked in the window, you were with someone else. You dick!
Anyways, Katharina's interest makes sense. When you first meet her, you strive to save her friend from mortal peril, and then you clash in a tournament for the throne and she sees the strength in your ideals. I like that she eventually concedes and has the wherewithal to recognize that there is somebody better suited for the task. That speaks to her impressively humble nature in spite of the hopes of all Peripis basically being thrust on her shoulders as the famous bounty hunter. Nurse, I'm not gonna lie, he's the definition of unk. It's so dope working with him and hearing him reminisce about his youth and what he's learned from his life. I also love how casually the plot of ranking up his confidant is assembling a device that could literally destroy the entire world. Really cool stuff. Barden is a likable bloke, and I enjoyed how they used him as a vehicle to convey that being a good person and having the best intentions at heart doesn't automatically make you an effective ruler or leader. Alonzo, I don't know, it was weird for some reason. I just didn't care about him. In a weird way, he felt very over the top to me, like he was just doing too much. Like, you talk to bro for 2 seconds and then all of a sudden you're going to his village and then everyone he knows and loves is getting burned alive, including the woman who took him in as a child. Then the next time you talk to him, bro tries to kill himself. Then at the end of his story, he sets up this whole public execution of himself, which I was rolling my eyes at because no shit, you guessed it. He faked his own death. He was the one miss for me on this character roster, to be honest. It just felt like too much too soon, had zero prior affiliation, and then one conversation with bro, and then things kicked off in an insane way. And lastly, there's Gallica. I feel like they could have done more to characterize her, to be honest. She's definitely more likable to me than Mona, but I don't know if she invokes as many emotions in me as Mona did, if that makes sense. I just wish she had a bit more personality, or that you could spend time with her manually as opposed to your relationship growing through short cutscenes that were mandatory in the story. It feels like her whole personality was she's your fairy guide and she's not afraid to speak her mind. A few more things I want to note in the character section. Another thing I wish Atlas had learned from Persona 5 is just how much the fans love the sections where you could choose to spend dedicated time at an event with the character of your choosing, such as the school festival or Christmas or Valentine's Day, etc. In Metaphor, you can only do this on the Gauntlet Runner after the fight with the human sea monster, and after you defeat the human from the Dragon God Temple on Etria, so only 2 times across an 80-hour adventure. This is inexcusable in my opinion. These moments do so much to add to the role-playing element of the game. You basically get to convey who your favorite characters are, who you'd like to spend time with the most amongst your party. Alice always does so well to acknowledge this context in these scenes through the writing, as the characters are typically more vulnerable and willing to share more with you. In my opinion, they should have these events after every single major dungeon in the game. My last note is on romance. I don't hate that there's no chance for you to romance a character in this game, but I also would have preferred that they would have gave the player that choice. In the writing, they made it clear that certain characters that I mentioned prior had romantic interests in the prince. Just give the player the agency to choose to reciprocate or not. I think that makes the most sense. I made a whole video on why Makoto was best girl in Persona 5, so I'm no stranger to the simping parasocial ways video games can bring out in us. It's fun. Let me cook if I want to cook, Atlas. I'll put a link to that video and others at the end of this one, and of course if you're enjoying this video, I genuinely appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Now, let's move on and talk about the gameplay in this game. The gameplay. Let's start with the combat. I love the archetype system. I really liked how they implemented a difference between magic damage and physical damage, as this gave an option for strength-based characters to still hit weaknesses with elemental-based attacks. Love the front row, back row action. I think one of the shining points of this game, honestly, is how fucking cool the archetype designs are and how dope their evolutions look. I think that the royal archetypes were a very cool idea and really fun to play around with. That said, this is another area of the game that suffers from poor pacing. You see, given how powerful the royal archetypes are, they remove all nuance from the archetype system. There's literally no reason to not have a character just use their royal archetype. This means that their introduction to their story immediately makes all 40 other archetypes completely obsolete. This would be okay in theory. It's fun to build up towards uber powerful classes or powers in RPGs. The issue is, you unlock royal archetypes basically before you even finish unlocking all of the other archetypes. This means really cool elite archetypes like Dragoon, Martial Artist, Destroyer, Elemental Master, Tycoon, and Trickster straight up will barely get any playtime. This connects back to the pacing issue, and again, it's disappointing because there's a really easy fix. If we have the additional dungeons that I mentioned, i.e. the Mage Academy and the Elden Sanctum, you don't even have to change when you unlock the Royal Archetypes, which is after the Elden Sanctum. The inclusion of those 2 dungeons would mean that you have 2 entire dungeons, and of course bounty hunts and side mission tasks where you can enjoy the design and utilization of the elite archetypes. And then you'd still have the Dragon Towers, the Royal Palace, and Tyrant Star, and the final boss fight to have fun with the Royal Archetypes. This is a game that by all estimations has been in production for at least 8 years, a time frame that saw Atlus release multiple games in the same genre and format. It's just disappointing to see oversights like this in Metaphor when they had so much feedback from fans about easily adjustable things in their amazing games. The issue with archetypes is particularly disappointing because it's not an issue that Atlus had in Persona 5 Royal. The pace of unlocking personas was perfect in that game, and it made the gameplay feel fresher, because as you went through the game you were constantly seeing and using new personas. Persona Fusion added a really fun sense of discovery and role-playing elements to the game, where you could try to build a roster of personas so you could handle any situation. Additionally, in New Game Plus you got to keep all of your unlocked personas. That is something right there that could have helped my disappointment with the archetype system a lot. If in New Game Plus you retained all of your archetypes except your Royal Archetype, and you could just have fun using whichever ones you wanted. Instead, you have to re-unlock every single archetype. In other words, they're locked behind ranking up supporters just like in the original playthrough, the only difference being you keep your XP that you had amassed. That was a huge disappointment for me, as I was thinking to myself, well, at least I'll get to keep my new archetypes and that will make New Game Plus more fun and fresh. How mistaken I was. I have no clue why Atlus would choose to depart from a concept that was universally loved. You could argue that it doesn't make sense narratively speaking to retain all of the archetypes, but neither does fucking Joker having a level 99 Saturnail in Kamoshida's palace. At a certain point it's a game and you are allowed to slightly crack immersion here and there to enhance fun and freshness. New Game Plus is that certain point. Now, stepping back from archetypes, I was really disappointed with the variety in enemy design. The humans in this game have such interesting and unique designs. They're so fun to look at and fight, but you barely fight them at all. For the most part, you're fighting monsters that are generic and reskinned many times over. Even the boss monsters of quests and bounty hunts are mostly reused assets. I don't know, it just feels like for how long this game was being developed and for how there was no perceived time crunch on it, that there should have been a better variety of monsters and more humans for you to fight. I don't think there's any reason why there shouldn't at least be completely unique entities for each bounty hunt that you do. Speaking on variety, I'll just say it straight up. The dungeons in this game are kinda bad. Both the main dungeons and the side dungeons. Well, I don't know if bad is the right word, but they just pale in comparison to Persona 5 Royal. In Persona 5 Royal, the palaces are all completely unique and each one feels entirely different to each other. I don't just mean aesthetically, but functionally as well. The puzzles in Persona 5 vary greatly from palace to palace. In Metaphor, the dungeons kind of all have the same bland aesthetic if I'm being honest, and I genuinely can't even recall many of the puzzles or nuances within the Metaphor dungeons. This is likely because they were very easy and I don't remember having to stop and think at all. There are 11 main dungeons in the Metaphor, and I'd go so far as to say that the only intriguing ones from a design and aesthetic point of view are Inside the Worm's Stomach and the Tyrant Star. So 2 out of 11 make you feel like you're in a cool and interesting place and not just a generic medieval environment. This is disappointing to me. Maybe it's because one of the biggest fresh factors for Persona 5 was that the levels were completely different, or maybe just in general, regardless of that, the main dungeons, they're just not good enough. The side dungeons are somehow worse. They're bland environments and worse while they repeat the same 3 formats over and over. There's the open field you run around and kill a certain amount of enemies to spawn the boss. They just reskin that with a desert or snow or a forest. There's the cave that looks exactly the same no matter what cave it is, and sometimes you have to climb ladders or find holes to drop down. And then there are the towers, where you literally just rooms and stairs that you climb, and then at the top you face a boss. That connects to one of my biggest disappointments in this game. That would be the lore-rich optional side quest that you can take in the last act of the game to prepare you for the final dungeon. The one where you have to slay 3 dragons and then face down the Elegy of the Soul, which is a cool little Dark Link type boss fight. The one where you get to work with the legendary fairy companion of the first Hero King? Yeah. Instead of a grandiose, deeply hidden dungeon with a unique design, they just reuse assets for every single place this quest takes place. To me, this is inexcusable, at least from a game designer of Atlus's quality for a game that spent this long in development. By now, I'm sure you understand that rather than just make complaints, I also offer my thoughts on a reasonable solution. What they could have done at least to assuage these issues a little bit was use the unique landmarks as locations for dungeons. I'm talking about the stacked backgrounds that you encounter across your journey, where your team gets out and discusses their thoughts about things, then Nurse draws it and you give it to Maria. Man, this is what's disappointing. These locations are so intriguing and they add such fascinating lore to the mix. They already conceptualized numerous amazing areas, but instead of letting you, the player, explore them or have a quest there, you just talk and view a static image. That's frustrating, especially when the dungeons you actually crawl through are so devoid of the wonderful imagination that you find in these locations. I will end on a good note for the gameplay. I thought the stat increase in activities were Atlas's best yet. I loved how much variety they implemented from town to town, from learning the Mustari early on in the Grand Trad for wisdom, to bungee jumping off a cliff in Mantira and fighting in the Colosseum in Bridlehaven for courage, or debating other aspirants for the throne on stage in front of the masses for eloquence. There's a wide variety of actually intriguing activities you can do to raise your stat. In Persona 5 Royal, this wasn't necessarily the case. For example, you could help Soshiro around the diner to raise your kindness, but that wasn't exactly intriguing. It was more of a simple throwaway, like, hey, you want to raise your stat? Do this stat activity. As opposed to how it is in Metaphor, where you raise your stat by doing something that is intriguing to you outside of just a statistical boost. Let's move on and talk about the music. The music. It's possible that this was the part of the game most ruined for me by Persona 5 Royal. You see, saying that I like the music in that game would be an understatement. The music in that game has literally become the soundtrack to my day-to-day life. I'm serious. Year after year in my Spotify top 5 is composed of almost entirely Persona music. So I may have unfairly expected the music in Metaphor to blow me away and enter my rotation of songs, and it just didn't. I enjoy the music in Metaphor, and there were definitely a few moments in the game where it wonderfully accentuated a moment.
You know what they say. Anxiety breeds the world's cruelest monsters. I mean, fairies say that at least. I can at least cast my usual spell for you. It's the small comforts, right?
Right.
Music was the first magic this world ever knew, after all. Makes the road a little easier. Look! Over there! Let's go. Got a sec? That should come in handy. Pocket it. Great find. Keep it.
What the? Oh, no! I can't fail Lord Luis. Without him, I've got nothing left. You struggle in vain. I won't let you rob me of my glory! This is the way of the real world, little lordling!
You call this real? Leaders abandon their people and the innocent die by their scorn. If that's the real world, then it can die alongside you! My name is Leon Stroll de Haliatus. My home and my family were taken from me. I am the last of my house. I am the last of my noble bloodline. And in the name of my people, I will strike you down where you stand!
Lost a lance? Perhaps it's this one. At last your allegiance is laid bare. And if this lance wounded me, then I take it the one you provided me was a mere imitation. If you know what the lance is capable of, and surely you understand the situation. Your last hope is gone.
No!
It seems a shame to kill you, but I'm afraid you've gone too far. I have no intention of surrendering, nor of wavering in my convictions. That being said, you truly have impressed me. I will allow you some final words, if you have any.
We've come this far. Let's fight with all we have, Captain.
Luis, I will make an end of you here!
I should expect no less by a duel's code.
So be it. Allow me to even the score.
This is our mission. We'll see justice done, here and now.
Oh, souls of kings, give me strength!
Looks like we can't brute force through this one.
Summoner! I shall reach Summoner! No, not. I'd rather refrain for now.
I won't hold back!
Better be sure.
This is our mission.
Summoner!
We'll see justice done, here and
It is your turn!
You needn't hold back.
Better be sure.
I once had my own aspirations. Yes, I had dreams. But what has the world ever done for us?
What's happening?
The royal scepter? But how?
So be it. There is still time until my magic settles upon this land. Until then, I will watch the world collapse from my perch at the top.
Wait! Luis!
I have done this for their sakes, not for mine. History and the will of the people will prove that. If you have the strength to weather this storm and come to me, I will deem you a worthy opponent. It will be a mercy to you, at the very least.
That said, I don't take any issue in the style of music or think it was bad by any means, but with Persona 5 Royal, they had so many distinct songs that were somehow all bangers. All of the palaces had unique themes that slapped in different ways, your day-to-day in the game world had wonderfully addictive music, mini-bosses and Persona Awakenings had epic overtures. They just did everything beyond perfection musically with Persona 5 Royal. And deep down, I think I unfairly may have expected that from Metaphor. Fair or unfair, while it's good, I think the music could have been better because even within a stylistic genre, I've absolutely encountered better soundtracks. Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem Three Houses come to mind. Obviously, this section is probably the most subjective of the video, so I don't want to linger too long, so let's keep it pushing and talk about the little things now. Man, I'm gonna just rapid fire and list my miscellaneous gripes about this game. I only have a few because, guys, this is obviously a great game, but how in the world are all of the lines in this game not voice acted? I understand Alice has never done this, but surely the standards must be raised at some point. Let's get all these lines voiced. It's disappointing that a prior Atlas release, Persona 3 Reload, had a far higher percentage of voiced lines. With the success of Persona 5 Royal, I don't want to hear about budget. Get all of these lines voiced. The post-battle art in this game is straight up stale. It might be epic for newcomers, but having played Persona 5 Royal, this shit is whack as fuck, I'm not gonna lie. It's one of the two screens every single time based on if you get ambushed or got ambushed, or if it's a boss fight. and there's zero significance to which character lands the finishing blow. Obviously in Persona, depending on which character landed the finishing blow and which character ended things on an all-out attack, the post-battle screen would be different. These little quality of life things really help to ease the grind of the game and keep you engaged, especially once you've basically figured out the mobs of the dungeon and the combat becomes brainless since you know the recipes, so to speak. With this game being a game in which you traverse an entire continent, I felt replayability could have been enhanced if there were more RPG elements than where you got to go. Let me explain. I visited every single location in this world and finished every single quest in my first playthrough of this game, with something like 6 or 7 days to spare. I think if you gave the player more agency earlier on in the routes they took to be successful, for example if you had a choice between going to Brawlhaven or Mintira for a main quest and then you can visit the option you didn't choose afterwards and have a different experience there, that might freshen up the game experience, having more ors instead of every situation being an and. Well, that about sums up my disappointment in Metaphor Refantazio. I'm fairly certain that I'm just spoiled by the masterpiece that was Persona 5 Royal, and frustrated that Alice somehow managed to make some of the same mistakes they made in that game, while also making mistakes that didn't even exist in Persona 5 Royal. Metaphor is a wonderful game, and I'd recommend anybody play it, but I guess I made this video to get the feelings out that plagued me throughout my playthrough, especially towards the end of the game and in New Game Plus when I realized there was no more time left in the game for any of my grievances to be addressed. I love this game, but there were many missed opportunities in this experience. I guess all we can do is hope that Metaphor gets a royal version as well. It almost feels like you're doing this on purpose at this point, Alice, you cheeky dogs. If you enjoyed hanging out and chatting video games, I've got another video essay I think you'd like right here. There are also ranking videos on my channel, so try this one out and let me know your thoughts. It's possible you'll disagree with the things I say, but I promise you'll be entertained. Thanks so much for watching, and subscribe if you love video games. I'll be discussing plenty more of them here, and you're always welcome. Hope you all have a great day, night, or morning, and remember to be kind and thoughtful. Peace.
Checkmate.